Did you just get your VA disability rating back and the number feels like a slap in the face? Maybe you expected 70%, but they only gave you 30%. You feel deflated, frustrated, and maybe even betrayed, thinking, "This is it, I guess I'm stuck." Stop right there. That initial rating is not a verdict, it's a negotiation, and frankly, the VA often fails to see the complete picture of your suffering. They miss the easiest, most straightforward paths to the 100% rating you deserve. This isn't about gaming the system, it's about understanding the system better than the raters themselves, especially when it comes to the single most powerful appeal trick available to veterans today. The VA system is designed to be confusing, but once you understand this one critical strategy, how to leverage secondary conditions, you take back control of your claim. We are going to expose 7 massive misconceptions about your rating and show you the exact procedural steps to challenge and maximize your compensation, turning that initial disappointment into a fully deserved outcome. The first and most pervasive myth you must abandon is the idea that the initial compensation and pension or CNP examination is accurate, complete, or fair. The VA relies heavily on this snapshot assessment, often conducted by a contractor who has never met you before and likely only spent 15 or 20 minutes reviewing your medical history. Think about that. 15 minutes to assess years of service-related trauma and physical decline. It's fundamentally flawed. These examiners are often overworked, focused on checking boxes, and they rarely, if ever, take the time to read the entirety of your service treatment records, let alone your post-service medical history. They are looking for reasons not to grant service connection or not to grant a high rating. Their job is efficiency, not advocacy. They often confuse objective medical findings with the specific functional limitations required by the VA rating schedule. For example, a CNP examiner might note that your knee has a certain range of motion, which is true, but they might fail to document the excruciating pain, the frequent flare-ups, or the functional inability to stand for more than 5 minutes, which are the elements that actually drive a higher rating. If the examiner simply records the medical finding without adequately describing the functional impact on your daily life and ability to work, the rater is legally obligated to assign the lower percentage. This is the first trap. You must assume the CNP examiner will miss crucial details, and your appeal strategy must be built around correcting their omissions, not just arguing their conclusions. We see countless veterans who walk into the CNP exam believing their honesty and medical records will speak for themselves, only to be crushed by a low rating because the examiner failed to translate their pain into the VA's specific language of functional impairment. They might note you have chronic back pain, but if they don't explicitly state that the pain requires you to change position frequently or limits your ability to lift, the rater will stop at a 10% or 20% rating. The entire premise of your appeal must be to provide the missing context that the rushed CNP exam failed to capture. Furthermore, sometimes the examiner is not specialized. You might have a complex neurological condition examined by a general practitioner. This lack of specialized expertise is a massive loophole you can exploit in your appeal by introducing specialized evidence later on. Never accept the CNP report as gospel. View it as the starting point for your strategic rebuttal. If the report says your condition is mild but your life feels anything but, you have a solid foundation for your appeal. The VA's own procedures allow for the CNP to be outweighed by more compelling evidence, especially when that evidence addresses the functional limitations directly. This initial low rating is often just a symptom of a flawed information-gathering process, and your job is to flood the VA with the correct, detailed, and legally persuasive information they overlooked. This brings us directly to the trick that bypasses the CNP trap entirely. The single most powerful, yet frequently overlooked, VA appeal trick is maximizing your Hobart secondary conditions. Most veterans focus solely on the primary conditions directly linked to service: the bad knee, the traumatic brain injury, the initial diagnosis of PTSD. While those are crucial, the true path to 100% often lies in the chain reaction of disabilities that stem from that initial service-connected condition. Think of your body as a complex machine. When one part breaks, it inevitably stresses others. The VA is legally required to compensate you for any condition that is caused by, aggravated by, or is the result of a service-connected disability. This is the secondary condition rule, and it is the golden ticket to maximizing your rating without having to fight a complex battle over the original service connection. For example, if you are service-connected for a severe ankle injury, primary condition, and due to the altered gait and continuous favoring of that leg, you subsequently develop chronic knee, hip, or back problems, those secondary orthopedic issues are now compensable. This is often an easier claim to win than trying to push your ankle rating from 20% to 40%. The medical connection is usually much clearer and easier to prove with an independent medical opinion. Another extremely common example involves mental health. If you are service-connected for a chronic pain condition, say degenerative disc disease, and the constant debilitating pain, inability to work, and reliance on medication leads to severe depression, anxiety, or insomnia. Those mental health diagnoses are secondary to the physical pain. Winning a mental health claim as a secondary condition can often secure a 50%, 70%, or even 100% rating, dramatically increasing your overall combined percentage. The critical insight here is that the VA often misses these secondary connections because the C&P examiner for the primary condition is not looking for them, and your primary care doctor might not explicitly link them in your records. Your job in the appeal is to explicitly draw that line. You must identify every single ailment you currently suffer from, no matter how small, and trace it back to a service-connected condition. Are you taking medication for your service-connected condition that is causing chronic digestive issues or acid reflux? That GERD is a secondary condition. Did your PTSD lead to weight gain because you stopped exercising, which then contributed to sleep apnea? Sleep apnea can be secondary to PTSD. This is the strategic leverage point. By introducing these secondary claims, you are not fighting the VA on old ground. You are presenting new evidence for new conditions, which often forces the VA to schedule a new C&P exam specifically for that secondary condition, resetting the playing field entirely. To execute this trick successfully, you need a strong medical nexus, linking the primary and secondary conditions, and that nexus must use the magic words, "at least as likely as not." Do not waste time arguing about the initial 30% rating. Instead, file supplemental claims for 3 or 4 secondary conditions that, when combined, push you far past the next threshold. This is the appeal trick that bypasses the bureaucratic resistance. The third element vital to overriding a low rating is harnessing the immense, often underestimated, power of lay statements and buddy statements. The VA regulations explicitly state that lay evidence, meaning testimony from non-medical professionals, you, your spouse, your friends, your fellow veterans, can be considered competent and credible evidence, especially when describing the onset, progression, and severity of your symptoms. Why are these statements so powerful? Because they address the functional impairment that the C&P exam missed. The examiner only sees you on a good day for a few minutes. Your spouse, your buddy, or your own personal statement, VA Form 214148, sees you every day, witnessing the debilitating effects of your condition. This is where you fill the gap between the medical diagnosis and the reality of your suffering. For a high retention script, we need to be extremely detailed about how to write these. A good lay statement is not just an emotional plea, it is a clinical description of functional loss. It must detail specific incidents, frequency, and duration. For example, instead of writing, "My back pain is terrible," a high-impact statement would say, Since January 2021, I have been unable to sit for more than 30 minutes without severe radiating pain down my left leg. I have to stand up and walk around every 20 minutes, which makes driving and working impossible. My spouse has witnessed me collapse in pain 3 times in the last 6 months after attempting to lift a gallon of milk. The detail makes it credible. For buddy statements, seek out fellow service members who witnessed the in-service event or who saw the immediate onset of your condition. Did a buddy see you fall during a training exercise? Did they witness the personality changes after a traumatic event? Their testimony detailing the event and the immediate aftermath is often enough to establish service connection where records are missing. Furthermore, for secondary conditions, the spouse or caregiver statement is gold. They can attest to the daily impact of the primary condition causing the secondary one. For instance, if you claim depression secondary to chronic pain, your spouse can detail how the pain caused social isolation, inability to engage in hobbies, and increased irritability, thereby providing the non-medical evidence of the mental health decline. The VA rater is required to weigh this lay evidence alongside the C&P report. If your lay evidence is detailed, consistent, and describes severe functional impairment, it can directly contradict and overcome a superficial C&P finding. Many veterans lose their claims because they submit vague, generalized statements. You must be specific, providing dates, locations, and witnessed events. If you are claiming a condition has worsened, your lay statement must detail the functional decline over time. This is not just a form. It is your opportunity to speak directly to the rater and paint the picture of daily struggle that the doctor's notes failed to capture. Mastering the lay statement is mastering the narrative of your claim, and a powerful narrative often beats thin medical evidence. Moving into the core technical hurdle, the fourth strategic point is truly understanding and perfecting the nexus, the missing link that connects your disability to your service or connects a secondary disability to a primary one. The nexus is the bridge. Without a solid bridge, the VA rater cannot cross the gap to grant service connection. The VA requires that the connection be established to the standard of at least as likely as not, meaning there is a 50-50 chance or greater that the condition is related to service. This is a lower standard than more likely than not, but many veterans and even doctors miss the critical legal phrasing. A treating physician who writes, "It might be related to service," is not enough. A physician who writes, "It is possible the condition is service-related," is also insufficient. The medical opinion must use the specific language. It is my professional medical opinion that the EI veteran's secondary condition is at least as likely as not caused by or aggravated by the veteran's service-connected primary condition. This precise phrasing is what the rater is looking for. If you are filing a supplemental claim based on the secondary conditions trick, you absolutely must have a strong nexus opinion for each secondary condition. This often means seeking an independent medical opinion, IMO, from a private physician, which we will discuss in more detail later. However, even when dealing with your treating physician, you need to gently guide them toward using the correct legal language. Bring them a template or explain the standard directly. The nexus letter must also be well-reasoned. It cannot be just a boilerplate statement. The doctor must review your service records, the C&P exam, and your current medical records, and then explain the pathophysiology, the EOC, medical mechanism by which the primary condition led to the secondary one. For example, explaining that chronic high-dose NSAID use for a service-connected joint injury caused gastric erosion and subsequent GERD is a strong, reasoned nexus. Simply saying the two conditions exist concurrently is a weak nexus. Furthermore, when appealing an initial denial of service connection, your nexus must directly address and rebut the VA's reasoning. If the VA denied your claim because they said your condition was constitutional, meaning not service-related, Your IMO must specifically state why the evidence shows the condition was either caused by service or was aggravated beyond its natural progression by service. The quality and specificity of the nexus is the primary determinant of whether your supplemental claim will succeed. Do not submit a supplemental claim relying only on new treatment records. Those records prove the existence of the condition, but they do not prove the connection. The nexus is the key to unlocking the appeal trick, providing the legal justification the rater needs to overturn the previous decision. Our fifth crucial strategy focuses on controlling the information flow by prioritizing the DBQ, Disability Benefits Questionnaire, DBQ, and avoiding the rater's trap. Many veterans simply attend the C&P exam and hope for the best. A far more strategic approach, especially during an appeal, is to obtain a privately completed DBQ from a qualified private physician. The DBQ is a standardized form used by the VA to translate medical findings into specific functional limitations. Raters are trained to look for checked boxes and specific language on these forms. The C&P examiner should be using a DBQ, but often their notes are narrative and incomplete, making the rater's job harder and thus increasing the chance of a low rating. When you file a supplemental claim, especially for a secondary condition, submitting a privately completed DBQ along with your nexus letter is incredibly powerful. Why? Because the private DBQ is specifically focused on documenting the functional limitations that translate directly to the highest possible rating. For example, for a mental health claim, the DBQ forces the physician to check boxes related to occupational and social impairment, which is the direct metric for mental health ratings 50%, 70%, 100%. It asks about deficiencies in memory, abstract thinking, and judgment. If those boxes are checked and detailed, the rater has little choice but to assign the higher rating. The rater's trap occurs when the veteran relies solely on standard medical records, which describe treatment but fail to use the VA's rating language. A doctor might write, "Patient reports difficulty sleeping." A DBQ forces the doctor to quantify that total occupational and social impairment due to difficulty in adapting to stressful circumstances. That quantification is what the rater requires. When submitting your private DBQ, ensure the physician meticulously documents functional losses like the inability to stand for certain periods, the need for frequent rest, the number of flare-ups per month, and the impact on employment. A well-executed private DBQ, especially one rebutting the findings of a poor C&P exam, often carries more weight than the VA's own contractor exam because it is detailed, specific, and addresses the rating criteria directly. This is about giving the VA rater the path of least resistance to grant your claim by providing them with a document that already speaks their language and checks all the necessary boxes required by the rating schedule. Use the DBQ as your roadmap to the higher rating. The sixth critical step in executing your appeal trick is selecting the correct procedural lane. Higher level review, HLR, versus supplemental claim, SC. Choosing the wrong lane can lead to months of wasted time and frustration. You must understand the distinction. A higher level review, HLR, is used when you believe the VA made an error based only on the evidence that was already in your file when the decision was made. You are asserting the rater misinterpreted the law, missed a piece of evidence, or made a procedural mistake. You cannot submit new evidence with an HLR. If you received a low rating because the C&P examiner failed to discuss your functional limitations and you believe the existing records already prove those limitations, an HLR might be appropriate. The key feature of the HLR is the possibility of an informal conference with a senior VA rater where you can verbally point out the specific error. However, for our appeal trick, the secondary condition strategy, the supplemental claim, SC, is almost always the correct path. A supplemental claim is used when you have new and relevant evidence that was not available or considered in the previous decision. When you introduce a claim for a secondary condition, the required evidence, the new diagnosis, the new nexus letter, the new private DBQ, and the detailed lay statements constitutes new and relevant evidence. You are not just arguing the old decision was wrong. You are presenting a completely new set of facts that the VA must consider. If you try to file an HLR for a secondary condition, it will be rejected because you are introducing new facts, the secondary condition and its nexus, that were not part of the original record. The supplemental claim is the vehicle for the secondary conditions appeal trick. It is the procedural mechanism that allows you to submit your private DBQ, your detailed lay statements, and most importantly, your independent medical opinion, IMO, which is the final undeniable piece of evidence that ties the entire strategy together. When filing the SC, make sure your new evidence addresses the reasons the VA previously denied or rated low. For instance, if the VA denied your back claim citing lack of nexus, your SC must include a new nexus letter that directly refutes the VA's previous findings. The strategic choice of the supplemental claim ensures that your new, powerful evidence is legally required to be considered by the VA, forcing a fresh look at your case. Finally, the seventh and often most decisive component in overturning a low rating and winning your secondary claims is the secret weapon, the independent medical opinion, IMO, or also known as a nexus letter prepared by an expert. While lay statements and DBQs are powerful, an IMO from an independent, highly qualified physician is the legal equivalent of a tactical nuclear strike on the VA's previous decision. The C&P examiner is a VA contractor, meaning their opinion is often viewed with skepticism by veterans and sometimes by the courts. An IMO, however, is a non-VA opinion that carries immense weight, provided it is well-structured and comprehensive. An effective IMO must do three things. First, it must explicitly state that the physician has reviewed the veteran's entire C file, including the prior negative C&P exams and the service treatment records. This demonstrates thoroughness. Second, it must provide a strong, detailed medical rationale, the EBIE nexus using the at least as likely as not language, explaining the pathophysiology of the secondary condition. Third, and most critically, it must directly rebut the VA's negative findings. If the previous C&P examiner concluded that the condition was not related to service, the IMO must specifically address that conclusion, explaining why the C&P examiner was medically incorrect based on the evidence in the file. This direct rebuttal is what forces the rater to weigh the two opinions. Because the IMO is often more detailed, based on a deeper review of the history and written by a specialized physician, it frequently outweighs the rushed C&P exam. For example, if you are claiming sleep apnea secondary to PTSD, an IMO from a pulmonary specialist who reviewed your psychiatric records and explained the known correlation between the two conditions, e.g., how central nervous system arousal from PTSD affects sleep architecture, is far more compelling than a general practitioner's C&P exam. Yes, an IMO costs money, often several $1,000s, but view this as an investment. If it secures you a 70% or 100% rating, the return on investment is immediate and substantial. The key is to find a provider who specializes in writing these letters, understands VA law, and is willing to stand behind their opinion. The IMO is the ultimate safeguard against a flawed C&P exam and the definitive piece of evidence required to successfully execute the secondary conditions appeal trick, proving the missing link and forcing the VA to grant the higher rating you deserve. Do not allow the disappointment of a low initial rating to define your future compensation. Remember the core strategy. Your initial rating is flawed because the C&P process is rushed and incomplete. The appeal trick. is to shift your focus entirely from fighting the primary rating to strategically filing supplemental claims for secondary conditions, those ailments caused by your service-connected issues. Use the power of detailed, specific lay statements from yourself and your loved ones to paint the picture of functional loss that the doctor's notes missed. Ensure every claim is backed by a precise, legally worded nexus that uses the "at least as likely as not" standard, and whenever possible, submit a private DBQ to speak the rater's language directly. And when the evidence is stacked against you, deploy the secret weapon, the independent medical opinion, a detailed expert rebuttal that forces the VA to reconsider their position. This is not about getting something you don't deserve. It's about making the VA fulfill their obligation to accurately compensate you for the full spectrum of suffering caused by your service. Take control of your claim today, gather your evidence, and execute this appeal trick to secure the benefits that are rightfully yours.